So we've now built a Swift playground that does almost all of the requirements of this project. Before we move on, let's go back and take a look at the requirements of the project just to make sure that we're covering all our bases. So looking here, what we were supposed to do is identify a category of item, organizing for this project. So for me, that was the robot. Create a base struct, and so mine is the robot struct that you saw in the first video. The next thing is create a list of items. So I've created 4 robots. Now, one thing that you might notice here is that it does say that there should be 10 items in my list. I only have 4. Now that I know that everything is working, I could add more robots to my list. But I know right now that this is not a requirement that I'm meeting. Next, requirement 4. Use Swift UI to create a navigation view. I've done that, and so that was my initial list of the robots. Second thing was creating an item cell. That was the robot cell in my example, and so in my robot cell, notice that the description says this should display enough information for the person to click, but not all of it. Mine only shows the name of the robot and I think the voltage. Creating an item detail, so mine is the robot detail, and my robot detail shows all the information. I'm really only using text for my examples, which is fine because it appropriately shows the information for my robot. As items are selected or changed in the navigation view, the information shown should change. You've seen that as I click between different items. Here, when I run, as I go through different ones, we see different robots showing on the screen. And use at least one control structure to change the text or appearance. And so I have done this with the little helicopter. You can see my control statement here, my if statement, where if the robot is flying, it shows a helicopter. If it's walking, it shows the robot leg or prosthetic leg, and otherwise it shows the car. And so you can see that I meet that requirement. And the last thing that I need to do in order to meet the requirements in the description is I need to use at least one UI item to change the value of a property. So let's now do that task. So this gives the example of a switch, but instead I am going to just include a button, and I'm going to make a button that increases the number of motors visible on the screen for a particular robot. So here's what I'm thinking. In the VStack, I'm going to add a button. And so I'm going to define a couple things. First thing is the action. Now, when this button is clicked, what I'd like to do is, let's say I want to take a motor number variable and I want to add 1 to it. As of right now, there isn't this motor number variable, so I have to add this. This is going to be a state variable, and for reasons I'll explain later, I'm going to make this a public variable, and I'm going to call it motor number, and we'll make it an integer. Okay, now it's going to complain, oops, I forgot about that. Public var motor number, okay, looks good. Now, it's going to complain because this doesn't have a value, and because of the way I'm doing this, I am going to need to load in a value for that motor number. This is not how I would do this in a bigger app. It's not elegant, but it's just a matter of trying to get this to work so that I can meet the requirements of the project. And we can refine this in the future to make it better. So the next thing to add in, to show for this button, I'm just going to keep this really simple, and I'm going to have a text element that just says add motor. And that's that. Okay. Now, one of the things that I'm going to need to change here is that because I've added that variable, I also need to give that motor number variable an initial value. So I'm going to set that motor value to be equal to the motor number of the robot that we happen to be on. And everything is looking good. Let's run the code. And so I can select a robot. You can see that my button is now showing up. And now I can click on Add Motor. Nothing seems to be happening. And that is because I haven't actually made, in my robot detail, I don't have it showing this motor number variable. It is still stuck on my robot. So let's fix that. And now we can see that as I hit that button, it adds motors to my robot. And now I have met requirement number 7 because I'm changing the value of a property, sort of. I'm not actually changing the value of the property. Remember, I'm just changing the value of this variable. It's going to take a little bit more work to actually change the value of the property of the struct. And in another video, I'll show how you can actually do that. It's not too hard, but it does require some changes that go all the way back to the struct that we created in the beginning. Next time.